Tell me, we're all set? Okay, we're going to call the meeting to order. Welcome to the regular monthly meeting of the Board of Finance. If we could please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Where? Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, well, welcome back, everybody, and Happy New Year. We have for our agenda tonight, first item of business is to hear a report from the town internal auditor on the internal audit activities for the period ending December 31st, 2019. Then we'll hear an update on the 2020 reassessment and reevaluation, and we have our town attorney here with us tonight. And then we'll hear an update on issues relating to the fill pile, and then to hear, consider, and act upon any other communication. So we do have our internal auditor here tonight, Mrs. Connie Saxel. Welcome.
Thank you.
And so just a little background. This report that we're going to review, at least half of it, was discussed with the audit committee, chaired by Mrs. LeClaire.
Yes, it was.
Right, so, okay, and we're going to get an update on the work done by yourself over the past year.
Yes.
And actually, in the charter, this is something that should happen at least, according to the charter, this is something that should happen at least twice a year. And so, yes, we get an update, and the Board of Selectmen will get an update semi-annually. So we'll start that process. So this will be the first of two report outs. So we thank you for being here, and we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you for inviting me. Good evening and Happy New Year to all. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Connie Saxel. I'm the internal auditor for the town of Fairfield. My office is located in Finance Sullivan Independence Hall. And I've been employed as the internal auditor for the town of Fairfield for 28 and a half years. Tonight I've compiled a list of internal audit work performed for fiscal year 2019 and for the 6 months ended December 31, 2019. Over this period of time, there were 13 internal audits conducted and 7 town-wide policies developed to establish and strengthen internal controls within the town. Various spreadsheets, financial statements, municipal surveys, and other accounting-related work was prepared throughout this period as well. Internal audits are conducted upon the request of the Chief Fiscal Officer, the First Selectman, and now the First Select Woman, boards and commissions. Many times, town employees and department heads will approach me and ask for a review of their departmental operations, and I'm always more than happy to comply. Other times, I select the departments to audit based upon the dollar amount of revenue and expenditures budgeted and the type of revenue collected and expenditures made. I also audit departments where audit findings and recommendations were made in the past to ensure that they've been corrected. Furthermore, I focus on departments where there could be significant risk incurred if strong internal controls are not in place. The main goals of internal audit are to objectively review departmental operations with a focus on their efficiency and effectiveness, ensure that controls are in place to safeguard town assets, ensure that departments comply with town policies, procedures, and laws, and make recommendations on how to improve internal controls. In closing, copies of all final audit reports, which include the purpose, scope, audit findings, and recommendations, are submitted to the Chief Fiscal Officer and Department Head upon completion of the audit. I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you may have on the list of internal audits that are provided and other work that is listed here.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Saxel. Because Mrs. LeClaire is the chair of the audit committee, I'll begin with you. If you have any comments or questions?
I don't. We had asked Connie or Ms. Saxel at our audit subcommittee meeting to prepare this list, and I wasn't fully aware of the audit she was performing, and I thought it would be very helpful for this board to also be familiar with them, because I think it gives us confidence in our internal control system, and it shows that we're always looking to improve and that someone is watching, that procedures are being followed. So I think it's good, and what I had in mind was just to ask Connie questions as we felt we needed to maybe pick out a few of these audits and policies she's prepared, and ask her to just give us a little summary, tell us what she found, and then what she recommended.
Thank-
And so I'm open to suggestions of what the board would like
All right.
to hear.
Thank you, Mrs. Leclerc. So perhaps what we can do is go through each category.
Sure.
And we could talk through some highlights. And we could
Okay.
start with the internal audits.
Okay, we'll start with fiscal year 2019 Building Department. The Building Department audit was very clean, no problems in revenue collections and deposits. The recommendations that were made there were made to improve operations. I had recommended that they consider adopting a credit card system as a method of receiving payment from customers. Also to provide customers with access to permit applications online for their convenience. Other recommendations, there were a series of recommendations considering levying a fee for processing certificates of occupancy. Currently, there's no fee for that. Adopting a permit checklist to facilitate the permit process for customer convenience. So these are just some of the audit recommendations to improve operations and efficiency. For the marina boat slips, I recommended that they establish safeguards over the handling and processing of the customer credit card information. I wanted them to safeguard personal customer credit card information to prevent identity theft and fraud. And hence, I adopted a policy which was departments that handle and collect customer payments via credit cards. So we have proper controls in place to safeguard personal credit card information. Other recommendations were customer payments for boat slips should be promptly entered into the system upon payment. Bank deposits should be performed on a daily basis for cash collections over $250 per town policy. I mean, I can go on and on all night, but we'll move on to beach parking. I had recommended better tracking of ticket inventory and ticket numbers sold. Attendants should be trained in the proper methods of cash collection and daily reconciling and tracking of beach parking tickets sold. All gaps in ticket number sequence must be investigated. For solid waste and recycling, I had recommended that they adopt a written policy at the scale house over there's a debit system of handling customer accounts that have negative balances. There was also the main office. I had recommended cross-reference their end-of-day cash register report to corresponding scale tickets for accuracy. The Recreation Revolving Fund. All expenditures from the Recreation Revolving Account must have proper supporting documentation to back up expenditures. Refunds from the Revolving Fund account must be supported by backup documentation and reviewed and approved by the department head. A secondary review of program fees should be instituted after entry into the RecTrack system and the Internet online registration system to ensure that the correct fees are entered for the correct amount. Solar usage. 3 out of 19 solar contracts were missing the price schedules, which outline prices that the vendor charges for solar usage. I had recommended the price schedules be obtained from the vendor and cross-referenced to invoices for accuracy. Certificates of insurance were not present. I had recommended that the certificates of liability insurance from the solar vendors be submitted to the town as required by their contracts. The construction material processing facility. I had recommended that cross-checking measures be employed by the department head before compiling spreadsheets which are submitted to outside parties. Cross-checking would involve referencing time cards in daily project sheets. For the golf pro compensation, I had recommended that the department head submit a copy of the Golf Commission vote to the pink voucher submitted to accounts payable, supporting the monthly compensation which is paid to the golf pro. Health insurance cost share. The cost share spreadsheet used by Human Resources Department should be reviewed and approved by the CFO prior to applying deduction amounts to employees in the Munis accounting payroll system. A cross-reference should be performed between the spreadsheet and the employee deduction report by bargaining group to ensure accuracy. Health insurance stipends. A written policy detailing the exact amount of calculating and distributing stipends should be established and followed by the Department of Human Resources. The employee master file in Munis should be updated with current up-to-date information on each employee for ease of reference. Library revolving and restricted funds. Bank deposits for cash collections over $250 must be performed on a daily basis by the department as required by town policy. A detailed spreadsheet should be submitted to the Board of Library Trustees each month outlining the vendor name, amount spent, and reason for the expense for their review. The library endowment funds. The Board of Library Trustees should create and adhere to a formal investment policy governing the library revolving funds. Copies of investment statements should be submitted to the CFO and controller on a regular basis. The board should employ a custodian for the administration and management of the library fund investments. The board should use an investment advisor to provide a professional report to the board on a regular basis of investment performance. The endowment funds should be reported on the comprehensive annual financial statement and recorded in the Munis accounting system. Tax collector. Documentation designating that refunds have been properly approved by the first selectman should be submitted to the finance department prior to the processing of refunds by accounts payable. Deposit transmittal sheets must be signed and approved by the department head. Signature stamps should not be used. Cashier end-of-day report should be compared to the bank deposit and reviewed and approved by the department head after cashier closeout. And the security camera and monitoring system at the tax collector office needs to be examined by a professional to ensure that it is functioning properly and to ensure that a satisfactory system is in place. So those were highlights of the internal audits. Would you like me to go over the
Nope, I think we'll wait
policies?
for one moment here. Yeah, thank you for that. Just, I'll turn it over to the board, but when you make these recommendations,
Yes.
what's the process from there?
The process is first I write a draft report, which is reviewed by the chief fiscal officer. And then I submit the draft, he makes his comments and recommendations. I submit the draft to the department head for his review, and we meet and discuss the report, and he makes his comments and recommendations. And if necessary, any adjustments are made at that time. And then we finalize the report. The department head is always given an opportunity to write comments and which are attached to the report. Copies of all the final documents are submitted to the chief fiscal officer and the department head and are kept on file in the internal audit office.
Okay, I'm sure there's other questions about the department heads and,
Yeah.
Mr. DeWitt?
Yeah,
Go ahead.
sure. Sure, I'm going to ask what everyone else is thinking. Thank you. You went through very quickly who can, I wrote force an audit, that's not, but who can initiate an audit? You said the CFO,
Yes.
You can choose to just do it because you have someone. Who else can initiate an audit?
Audits are usually requested by the chief fiscal officer,
Mm-hmm.
the first select woman,
Okay.
boards, you certainly could request an audit, commissions, department heads, town employees, and I also select the department and to audit myself.
Got it. So there were, in your overview, there was a couple that said you did an audit and there was missing data,
Yes,
things like that. So it is the department head of which the audit is written that is responsible for making this right, is that correct?
yes, that is correct.
And I think the one that I highlighted only because I heard with the DPW, the town solar locations, right?
Yes.
Was missing data. Do you then go and say, what's your process or policy? And if the policy is not in accordance with your audit, do you force a policy change as well?
If I feel that there is a lack of a policy, I will create a policy and distribute it to the department. In that case, there were signed contracts which were to have the fee schedule attached to them of what the prices were to be charged for the solar usage. But
Right.
3 of them did not have this fee schedule, so therefore, the department head could not verify whether the invoices submitted were properly billed at the correct rates. So I had told the department head that he needed to obtain these fee schedules so they could be verified with invoices.
And I don't want to pick on this.
Follow up on that.
Yeah, please, sure.
So it took you to tell the department head?
Yeah, that's where I was going.
I mean, I don't understand this. So if you hadn't come along, the department head would get that bill every month, and what would he do with it? Nothing?
He would, what was happening was he was reviewing it and he felt it looked proper and adequate and submitted it for payment.
Who was that department head?
That department was the Department of Public Works Administration.
Okay, and who's no longer employed by us, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
And I don't want to pick on this one thing, but so who asked you to initiate that audit?
I initiated it myself when I saw the bills coming in, and I said to myself, I want to make sure that these bills are properly
Okay.
billed to the town.
Okay, great, thank you. Good for right now.
Mrs. Charlton?
Just talk,
Oh,
Yeah,
just as a,
let's
okay.
talk.
We have the fancy ones
Nope.
tonight? Okay,
no switch.
no switch, okay. Thank you for providing the summary. Once you provide the recommendations to the department head,
Yes.
what's the process to follow up to make sure they've adopted the recommendations? Who does that, and, you know, how long do you give them? Do they provide a formal response to your report in terms of how they're going to implement?
Well, usually the department head will, they're usually very amenable to all the audit recommendations, and they do adhere to the recommendations within, as quickly as possible.
How do you know that, though?
I do try to get back to the departments on a regular basis to ensure that these recommendations are adhered to.
Okay. My other question is, just broadly, in terms of the scope of the work, and you did answer some questions, thank you, about how audits are done, who requests them. So it might be Mr. Mayor, it might be a department head asks that you do a particular review, or you may decide that something needs to be done. You know, one of the striking things when you look at the scope of work this year, and recognizing that we've asked our external auditors to do some work, DPW, we had all the issues surrounding the fill pile. And when we spoke about those to Mr. Tetro months ago, he indicated that some changes had been made in purchasing policies around bonds, et cetera. Wouldn't those be areas that it would be appropriate to go back and look at to make sure, I mean, those are risk areas, right?
Yes.
Those are areas where we had a problem. So in terms of setting the scope of the audits, how do you think about that? And wouldn't it be appropriate to go back and look at some of those areas where we had a problem, someone said they fixed it, and we would do an audit to validate that they actually fixed what they said?
Yes, I agree with you. That can be an audit that will be performed in the near future to verify that bonds are properly submitted to the town and that bids are properly awarded to the lowest possible bidder in accordance with town charter.
Okay. I have some other questions, but if anyone else wants to,
Mr. Bateson?
Yeah,
Mr.
one
Mayor?
quick comment with respect to that. As you may not know, but don't know what the timing was, but the town has hired our outside auditor who's been doing an audit internally with respect to public works and purchasing related to all this pill file stuff.
yeah, no, I'm
So-
aware
so
they've
there's currently
been
an-
hired, but
So there's currently
last
an
time we
audit.
spoke to them at the audit committee, I don't even think we were going to get any preliminary indications back until March. But I guess my point
yeah,
was a
but
little
that-
different. These were things that Mr. Tetro said, or other town officials said that they made changes and they fixed. So shouldn't we, I mean, just from a risk perspective,
Yeah.
right? I mean, I've done audits for a living, right? Typically, what you look at is where's our risk, where do we have indications that things can go wrong, and then those are the things that we prioritize in terms of selecting what we should look at. And it just seems to me, with all of the issues surrounding the fill pile, some of which were financial issues, those would be good ones, irrespective of what the outside auditor is doing, to take some internal resource and make sure that the things we were told were in place have actually been put in place.
We've done
That's
that.
my,
We've done that with respect to purchasing.
we've done audits of those things, though?
I know that all that has been implemented because I work with it on a daily basis.
Agreed, but an
Yeah.
internal audit is different. I mean, you're the one being audited with
Yeah, no,
respect,
I'm
you
just
know,
saying, well,
so-
not necessarily. I mean, the purchasing is being audited. I'm not being
Okay,
audited.
but-
I'm just saying that I go down there. But no, we understand your comment. You want to go back, make sure everybody's doing what they're doing. I'm just adding two things to your comments. One, there's a more in-depth, I don't know if it's more in-depth, it might be an inappropriate term. One, there's an active audit going on right now to identify anything that has not been caught or adjusted in the past. And two, that I can say that many, if not all, of the things, based upon just my experience, that we've talked about, the bond issues and the insurance issues and some other items, have all been implemented, because I've helped put them together and helped create them. So they've all been, that's.
No, I
that's a little comfort
appreciate
there.
that, and thank you for
Yeah.
clarifying that. I just, again, in my experience, internal audit is oversight, right? It's a governance process, and so its purpose would be to validate that those things did occur and have an outside look, and that's part of what we are, responsible for determining that's happened. So I would just suggest that.
Yes,
it
I agree.
probably
I will
makes
put
sense
that
to-
on the list, and I will review that the bonds are properly submitted to the purchasing department.
Yeah, and just as a last thing, I know that when all that information came out with the affidavit, there was some stuff around the credit memos that actually came up in one of your audits.
Yes.
And I'm not sure this board knew about it, but that might have provided some, an insight or a heads up on some of those activities. So, the reports that you've written and the comments and, laying those out, telling us what the departments have done to respond to those comments, I think can be really important and helpful.
Oh, yes.
So, thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Mr. Bateson?
Yeah, thank you. Couple of things.
Yes.
I want to follow up on the solar thing. So we can all, at this table, we can all assume now that when a bill comes in, whoever's in charge is now reconciling that to the solar agreement, making sure that the amounts we're being charged is now verified by the contract.
Yes, that was my audit recommendation, and
Now, I know it's your recommendation,
will,
but are they doing it?
I will review that when I go back to the office to ensure that this is occurring. When the 16 out of 19 solar contracts that I did review were all proper and correct and in accordance with the price schedules. There were no problems or discrepancies in that area. Just those three were not present, so I could not validate that those prices were correct or not.
Okay, you mentioned something during the boat slip revenue when it came to credit card
Yes.
security. anytime I did something online, I kind of thought that I was switched external. You know what I mean? Like paid by credit card, and then I was taken, you're being redirected. Are we in the business of doing that now? Or I thought that we kind of like outsourced that, the credit card processing.
We do have through it's called Vermont Systems, and they are a credit card processor that works through the recreation system to process the credit card transactions.
So the town of Fairfield does have credit card information on file.
The credit card information, no, they do not maintain any credit card information. Many times, though, applicants will write their credit card number on the application and submit it to the Department of Public Works Administration
That I get. I
office.
just want to make sure that when we're online,
And and what I had recommended and told them was, once it gets entered into the system as payment, the payment gets processed through the credit card company, they must redact that credit card number off the application, so it is not available to outside parties.
okay, my concern, obviously what my concern is a
Right.
breach of the system.
Exactly.
And I want to make sure that we're covered on all ends, that we're taking all of our due diligence,
Yes.
not maintaining credit cards on file, that we're adequately insured in case something does happen, because we've all seen this in the
Right.
media, the numbers that go around and what happens. So, to that point,
Yeah.
what do we do about, I remember years ago, we had a problem with beach parking revenue. Are we still doing cash on those?
Yes. For the beach parking attendants, yes, they are collecting cash.
Okay, and that was one of your audits, and you were happy with everything you found? Daily reporting, daily deposits?
There were lack of controls in monitoring the tickets. All the tickets are pre-numbered, and I noticed that the attendants, there were gaps in the sequences, the attendants weren't tracking the tickets properly, they were going into a drawer and taking batches of tickets out, they were not in sequence, it was very difficult to track.
Okay,
the
you know what
tickets.
gaps in sequence mean?
Yes, so I went
So
through.
I'm just
and
saying, that's kind of, I want to make sure the town's getting its money.
No, I agree, and
And I
so
think
do
that
I. Right, and
if we
so,
can migrate to get out of
It-
cash in that business, and
Right.
people, oh, you don't take cash? Sorry, we don't.
right,
I-
so
I'm-
we established a policy where, in a program where all the tickets are now
Okay.
present
From an
and
internal,
accounted.
from a risk point of view,
No,
or
I agree, and,
temptation point of view,
yeah,
cash in the field is always a
right.
difficult
And
thing,
that's
so
why
I
I
would
said we
encourage
have to-
Parks and Rec to, I would rather make it a little bit more difficult on the customer, but ensure that we're getting our money.
Right. And so, yes, so I told them that they had to monitor every ticket number that is issued. There should be cash associated with each ticket number. Every ticket number sold, there should be a cash deposit associated with it. They have a end-of-day reconciliation that they're preparing, which is signed off by a supervisor, and reviewed and approved. So and I also said that they should establish a training session, because these are young,
Yeah.
kids, and they need to be trained to show them how to fill out a basic form to
That's all I
close
got,
out the
Jim.
end of the day.
All right, thank you, Mr. Bateson.
Mr. Walsh? Sure. First of all, Connie, thanks for attending tonight, and thanks for
thank
your
you.
hard work on some of these audits. I talked about some of the things that you mentioned earlier.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, these audits can they be provided to the Board of Finance?
Yes,
Okay, every single one when you produce them?
I could.
Okay, that'd be great. And maybe
Yeah,
just
so
have whatever you've done,
starting
whatever you've done for the month, just ask our clerk to put it in our monthly packet.
Yes.
This way, I don't think, if something comes
Yeah,
up
it's probably easier for you
contemporaneously, we
to
could all
read.
like ask about, or ask Bob to follow up on it, or maybe he has
Mm-hmm.
the answer to it already. This way, we won't have to probably ask these questions to you about
Mm-hmm.
audits that happened a year and a half ago now and things like that. That'd be great. The other thing is, can you put the audits online and make them available to the public so the public can have access to them?
I could, if
there a
that is
problem
what
with
the
that?
board wishes.
Bob, do you see any problem with that? Okay, I just want to have as much transparency as possible. And this way, if there's some audit and someone's concerned about a department and you just audited them a year ago, we can go back and look at what your audit proved a year ago. potential, you need to put, he's asking you to put my microphone, what?
I'm just talking about, I mean, look, these things are all FOIable anyway, right? It's number one. Number two, when you put something online like this, you may be putting more information online than you want to. I mean, because it may give people information like if you see that there's some kind of flaw that was there, well, has it been corrected? Is it corrected yet? Go back. But I'm just saying those are the dangers, but I don't think there's any problem with it. I mean,
All right, well, maybe if you see a need to redact it, maybe we would let you redact it, and we could ask the question of why it's redacted, you know? You know, I agree that if you found some flaw in the system that someone could be stealing money for us, I prefer it not to go public, but until it was corrected. But I think that maybe, I don't know how the rest of the board feels, but I would feel comfortable with you redacting it, but maybe explaining to us in the next board meeting why you redacted certain pieces of information. All right. So getting back to my initial question about the DPW and the solar, the three contracts that do not have the solar thing, and the head of the department, well, Mr. Bowman was also there, correct? He seems to know most
Yes.
about the solar project himself, so he was not reviewing that?
He also was reviewing those invoices as well.
And had no problem with the three contracts that did not have pricing attached to it, just approving the invoices as they came in?
He did tell me that he would contact those vendors and obtain the price schedules.
Okay. In regard to what you were just talking about with down at the beach, isn't there a better type of system that could be recommended in regards to the cash that's collected? So, for example, when I go to most 90% of the parking facilities I go to now, used to be I used to give cash to a guy when I pulled in,
Right.
or when I pulled out with my ticket. That no longer happens. There's a machine there. It stamps, gives me a ticket with a barcode, and I can't get out without paying. And normally there's some place, could be close to the pavilion, where I could prepay, so when I pull out, I just show my barcode.
That would be an option. I guess Recreation Department and Purchasing Department would have to look into seeing what the cost of something like that would be, and yeah, that is an option.
Yeah, it seems
There's
to me
other
like it would be a
methods,
pretty
yeah.
good option.
Yeah.
Because it would take away some of these questions. We pretty much know that the money we're getting is our money, and that we're getting,
Right.
everyone who's going in is,
You'd probably have to put a gate there
Yeah.
to prevent people from entering the
Yeah.
parking lot, and, yeah, I mean, that is possible.
okay, the same thing
That's
appears
something
to be
to
the same down at the dump itself. You know, it's kind of a strange system. Like, I go in, and someone looks at my stuff and says, okay, it's $6, and then they give me 2 receipts.
Right,
And then I have to go to another little hut,
yes,
and that guy's sole job all day long
that is correct,
is just to take my yellow piece of paper.
yes.
He's a Yankee fan. He's a Yankee fan, and I like that.
Actually, he's a part-time
Sound like a
employee,
player on the baseball side.
He's a Sox fan, though.
yeah.
But it seems to me there should be a type of system where we get a coin, or once again, some type of scanned thing where somebody could just go and not be paying somebody to be there
Well, the
for the
second,
entire period of time that we're open.
the second person is there to make sure that the cashier, because there is a high volume of cash that
Sure.
does transpire down at the solid waste and recycling facility. The second person is there just to ensure that the cashier has indeed taken funds from the customer,
It's not put in 0.
correct.
Okay.
So he's there to make sure, yes, I got a receipt from this person, he has paid.
Okay.
So that's just to ensure that we do get our money.
Well, I guess there would probably be a way for the person who takes the money to have to put something into the cash register or print out a receipt with like a scanned thing, and it would serve the same purpose. Clearly, there shouldn't be zeros going in.
Correct, right. There are no zeros
Okay.
going into the cash register.
Okay.
there are sometimes voids because mistakes have happened, or the customer changed their mind and that sort of thing, and those all have to be explained and accounted for. There should never be zeros or voids.
Each of your audits found some substantial things,
Yes.
which leads me to believe that we should be doing more audits. And for like this year, like, you know, there's a zillion other things you were doing.
Yes. I wear
No,
many hats.
So, I mean, there's lots of things you were doing, and I'm sure some of them had to do with some of the current stuff that's going on, and you give a very detailed list of all those other activities.
Yes.
But it seems to me more effort should be going into internal audits, because each audit seems to find what I consider to be, and what you've described, and you didn't even describe everything that
Right,
was on the
and-
report.
And I just touched
But
upon
everything
them.
that you described were substantial things.
Yes.
So I think this body's got to discuss how much more effort we would like Ms. Saxel to start putting into audits. And if we need a person in that department to do other tasks that you're being, I'm not going to say forced to do, but being requested to do, then I think we're going to have to deal with that.
Just jump to Mr. Mottola.
I was going to follow up on that. You indicated that you do these audits, you make recommendations, draft reports, meet with the department head, and then you try to follow up to make sure
Yes.
that these things are being implemented. Do you have, and I'm saying this, asking you this question because I think it's a concern that we all have as a board, are you, and I'm not trying to be critical though of this question, are you able to do that in an effective way, or do you feel like you're, you know, going in too many directions and?
Well, I do wear many, many hats. For example, from the months of July through probably the first week of November of 2019, I was inundated with FOI requests, one after the other, as you can imagine. So obviously, I had to fulfill those requests, so time had to be spent doing other things other than internal audit. Of course, obviously, the general fund bank reconciliation is voluminous, it's time-consuming, it's a large account. So I do try my best to give special attention to all the internal audits, to follow up on the recommendations, and you know, try to cover areas that I think are important and need to be looked at. So, you know, it's a question of how much time do you want me to devote to internal audit, how much time do you want to devote to accounting tasks and other tasks.
Are you the only internal auditor? in
Yes,
Fairfield?
yes. There used to be two at one time,
All right.
two full-time,
When
yes.
was the last full-time?
I believe she went on maternity leave, and that was probably in at least 10 years ago, 10, 15 years ago, and
Never came
yeah.
back?
No.
Do we have, Bob, maybe you can answer this question. Are we inundated with FOI requests in the town of Fairfield? Do you have any knowledge of that? And if so, do we have a compliance officer for FOI? I don't think we do.
We certainly were during this last election period.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah, it comes and goes, and yes, we have a compliance officer that reviews it all, but most of the document pulling and all that kind of stuff comes out of finance.
For finance? Okay. All right. Thanks.
Yeah, go to Mrs. Marmion.
I just have a question on process. So we have an audit committee of the Board of Finance. When you meet with the audit committee, are you going through in detail or handing over, as Mr. Walsh requested, that detailed audit report?
Historically, in the past, the audit reports were presented on an as-requested basis. But I'm more than happy to come every 6 months and give copies of the reports and discuss the reports with the board.
I'm just wondering if it doesn't make sense when the audit committee reconvenes to kind of look at the process that we go through in terms of what they receive and what they might want to delve more deeply into, and then perhaps report back to the board. But I personally find it very helpful to hear from you, but I know that maybe the audit committee could also delve into this a little bit more, even more frequently, and then you could come before us. It's just an idea to kind of work through that process with the committee.
We'd be happy to. I personally wasn't aware that Connie was even doing internal audits. At one point in time, she was more or less pretty much providing support to Bob and preparing schedules. And so I think we had a little bit of a gap. But Connie has come to the Board of Finance before and reported to us, and that's where she always did report, not directly to the audit subcommittee. But I'm happy to work with Connie a couple times a year and see what she's looking at and if we have recommendations for her.
When's the last time you were before the Board of Finance?
I believe it was sometime in 2017.
Okay. All right. Mr. DeWitt?
Thank you. I agree with Mr. Walsh's comments about we need more audits. There's things to audit. But unlike Ms. Charlton, I appreciate hearing the audit. I'm not an auditor, right? But I am a process guy. And when I hear that we're doing a lot of audits, we need to be talking about policies as well and processes. So I just want to make sure that I said that. Having said that, do we have a policy on audits and the audit? I mean, I know the charter spends 2 whole sentences talking about all your responsibilities, but do we have a policy on audits or
No.
auditing?
No, we do not have a policy on audits.
Okay. Because here's what I got out of this conversation tonight, not an auditor. You do some due diligence, you provide a detailed audit, you tell exactly in painful detail what went wrong, and then I get the feeling that sometimes it isn't done. And what I got out of Ms. Charlton's discussion is you should be the end of the process. After everything's implemented, you go back and do an audit and say, yep, good job, policies in place, everything's cool. It doesn't sound like that's happening. It sounds like you're initiating, which is really good. But you also need to come in the end and say, you've complied. So
Right.
I don't want to speak for you, but that's what I got out of what you said, right? And then the last thing, and I think it'll build on what Ms. Marmion said, I think the audit committee should at least, let's establish 2 dates, because it does say by the charter every 6 months or semi-annually, right? We should get a review, as the Board of Selectmen should. We need to figure out when that is. I'm not so sure about monthly, Mr. Walsh, but at least quarterly. I'd like to know what the audits are, so.
I was just suggesting that as they become due, just produce them.
Well, there you go.
I mean, I wasn't looking to talk about it every month. What I'm saying, what I was requesting was that as the audits are completed,
Okay.
whenever, there might not be one for 6 months. But
Yeah,
if
okay.
one is finally completed, whatever audits are done that are completed that month be included in our package as they're completed.
Okay.
So.
Would you like me to come and present as well?
No, I'm not asking you to present.
Yeah, no, I'm-
I mean, I think that if we all looked at it and we talked
You
at
may
our
have
meeting
it.
and said, hey, we have some questions, and we talked to Bob, and he said, well, maybe we should get Connie here.
Okay.
You know,
Yeah.
no, I'm not asking.
No, I
my
coming every so
No,
often.
I was
and-
more saying that we should just get a copy
Yeah,
in our package as you're,
okay.
or distributed through Jen or somebody
Mm-hmm.
as they're completed.
Yeah. That's a good idea, because you know what, when I read the agenda and I knew you were coming tonight, hadn't looked at the backup, I just assumed that there was going to be a list of DPW audits like as long as my arm, and there's one, and it's about solar changes. I would have bet my mortgage that we wouldn't be talking about solar changes in DPW. There'd be 20 other things we'd be talking about. So, yeah, I think Mr. Walsh's recommendation is a good one.
So I interrupted Mr. Walsh for Mr. Matolos. I just need to jump back to Mr. Walsh. And then,
I would just want to get back to the follow-up when you're done. It seems to me that there should be some type of policy that like the next year you'd have to go check to see whether it's done. And the reason I'm suggesting that is because in our own audit, when we have Mr. Centofanti come every single year to do our external audit of the town, and he has recommendations, the very first thing he does is check on the recommendations he made the previous year, and if they haven't been corrected, they get relisted.
Right.
And it's kind of embarrassing when that happens.
Yes.
And there's been some, because we haven't had the time or the personnel to complete some of those tasks. I'm not saying that it's anybody's fault, some of that stuff. But I mean, I will tell you that the last time he came here, we'd finally gotten off of our list 2 or 3 of the ones that had been dangling out there
Right,
for maybe
yeah.
3 or 4 years, and it was nice to see that they were finally gone. But to the extent, I think that if the town departments knew that you were going to be following up, they would have to know that there was going to be implementation. And I'm not saying that you'd redo a whole audit of that department. What I am saying is that you might stop by and check on them randomly a year later.
Yeah. I also think that the fact that now that departments know that the reports are going before the Board of Finance, that will provide them with incentive to, adhere to the audit recommendations. Unfortunately, it's just me, I'm giving recommendations, there's no ramifications, there's no repercussions if they don't follow up on these recommendations. So, you can lead a horse to water, but you
No,
can't
but I mean,
make
if
him
you're
drink,
not being followed, I think you should have to report to us. This way
Right.
we can then ask that
Right.
the department head come before
Right,
us.
so now at least I'll have the support of the Board of Finance. Yeah,
Well, that's the other thing.
Yeah, this should not be voluntary
Yeah, right.
for someone to, respond.
You need a big cardboard cutout of Mr. Walsh in your office. When you're,
Thanks,
you're
Chris.
talking to the department head.
yeah.
You mentioned that approximately 10 years ago, there were 2 of you. 10 years ago, were you just doing audits full-time, internal audits full-time? Or were you,
Yes.
or was like half your time split between?
It was pretty
finance
much, it
department
was
items?
90% internal audit and maybe 10% was the bank reconciliation at that time.
Okay, how about
And
the
then-
other individual, to the best of your knowledge, on that person?
And also internal audit as well,
Okay.
probably 100%. Yeah.
So
We
it
were-
seems like 10 years ago, we had 2 people full-time. And now, what do you think you spend on internal audits now, out of your, and I know it must vary, like you said this
It
year.
does, it varies. It
This year's a
depends.
difficult year because of all the FOI stuff.
Well, let's see, I mean, I spent probably, I want to say at least 40% on internal audit, maybe.
Okay.
And the rest is accounting work and, other types of financial work.
Okay. Another question that I thought about while you were making your presentations on the internal audits that you did was on the DPW, once again on the DPW solar location and contract price charge for usage audit. You found out that they did not provide us with insurance. And this is once again a problem that we see over and over and over again. It's just kind of like the bonds at the DPW that were never checked on by anybody to find out we had fake bonds and things like that. I don't understand what the town process is on how we allow people onto our property to do a job without the insurance being in place and us having a certificate of insurance in place with the town of Fairfields
I agree. I did,
on it. Because I know where I'm employed, that doesn't happen.
right. I did contact Risk Management, and I notified them that there were no certificates of liability insurance. And he is aware of it. Whether or not those certificates have been obtained, I can't answer that.
Our director of risk management. So you don't even know right now whether they're in place?
Correct.
Okay. Bob, can you find that out?
We have, for every contract that's entered into, we have 2 check mark, we have a check, a schedule. that has all the items that need to be included, all the insurance, all the bonding, what's been checked, what hasn't been checked, what's been confirmed, has it been approved by the risk manager, et cetera, et cetera. So we've been doing that for a few months. It's one of the things we created a few months ago.
That's been in place for a couple of months.
A few months, right.
Okay.
And we've also gone back through, and we're in the process, going back through all renewals and going back through the files to see if we can identify anything that's lacking. And if there is, then we deal with it. But I don't think we've found anything lacking for a while.
Okay. Is there any credit card information at all? I was a little confused by your answers. It seemed to suggest you said that on the town servers, there is no credit card information that you know of that we have on our town servers in any department.
When I did the audit of the marina boat slips, there was credit card information from the customers on the server. And I said that should be deleted off the server immediately, because obviously this is personal information, and I feared that, someone might be subject to identity theft, or who knows. So the department was notified that these items were not to be maintained on the server. There were also customer credit cards numbers on applications that were filed in a filing cabinet that was unlocked. I told them that they needed to redact the credit card numbers off of the applications for customer security. So that was my recommendation. I notified the Director of Information Technology also and told him that there should be no credit card information stored on our town servers as well.
Okay, and that was only the department that you audited that you found that, right? So you don't really know whether we keep credit card information on any of the servers or town computers?
Well, I did issue a policy to the departments that do collect
good.
revenue via credit card,
Right.
and they were required to sign that they had reviewed the policy and they will adhere and abide by the policies.
Excellent. So therefore, all credit cards that we use for any of our programming and things are all done through a third party, correct?
Correct.
So they're the ones who collect that information, store it,
Correct.
insure it. We just get a notification that there was payment made.
That is correct.
Okay,
And
great.
and if for any reason a credit card number is submitted on an application to a department, I told them that it's not to be stored in any manner once it's been processed.
That's great. The policies that you create or that are created in finance, the financial policies, is there a book on that? Where are those kept and how can they be found?
We do save those on, there is a town share drive, which is accessible to all town employees, and the policies are saved on that drive
Okay.
and accessible to all employees. I also email the policy to the department heads and so forth, and I have copies of all the policies.
How many policies do you think we have?
Probably at least 30 or 40,
Okay. Okay.
all different types.
Okay.
I expected
That's
that
it.
number to have at least another zero. Seriously.
Mr. Charlton?
Really?
Yeah. I
No,
really-
I've been writing policies for years and years, and the reason why I started to write the policies was my fear that if I didn't have policies and procedures in place, that there could be opportunities for assets to be lost.
Mrs. Charlton?
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Walsh read my mind with a few of his last questions, so thank you for that. But what I was going to ask you and what I would just like to emphasize, you said you spent roughly 40% of your time so far this fiscal year doing internal audits?
Yes.
Okay. And you've been with the town 23 years?
28 and a half.
28 and a half years. Well, thank you for that. We are, the town is fortunate to have someone with your number of years' experience in this role. And my personal opinion is to be utilizing your time doing FOIs is a waste of time. And at a minimum, we should have someone like you spending 100% of their time on internal audits, and especially given the situation we just went through, where it's going to cost us, we don't know how many millions, as a result of, among other things, breakdowns in our internal controls. I would encourage us to look at this in the budget process. I don't think we need someone of your experience doing bank reconciliations. I think we can have a more junior person in an accounting role doing that, or we can hire someone to do that. But to Mr. Walsh's point, you came up with recommendations on all of these audits, some of which sound somewhat troubling. Hopefully they've been fixed, maybe they haven't. But these are real issues. And it's really, you know, penny wise and pound foolish if we are not directing these resources into getting these things fixed, following up on them, and making sure that, that we're looking at these opportunities. I think we should get out of the business of collecting cash wherever we can. It's just a bad practice. There's no reason that we need to be doing things like that. So I hope that as we move forward in the budget process, we address this issue, because I think we need your time spent more productively on these things. And I would encourage you, and we'll talk to you about it during the audit committee meetings, during a finance committee meeting, to really, I'd encourage us all to think collectively about doing a risk assessment and thinking about where we should be doing these audits, where the time should be directed, and focusing on areas like DPW where there were known problems.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, thank you very much. So that was just, Mr. Testani, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry, just had a quick thing.
Yes.
On the issue on the DPW thing, I know we've talked about it a little bit, but I was just curious, when you come to the end of what you're able to accomplish, and let's say they haven't conformed to your recommendations, I know now that the department heads are aware that they then come back to the Board of Finance, but in terms of the procedure, do you then make the CFO aware of it, or then the first selectwoman, is that?
Usually the report goes to the chief fiscal officer and the department head and myself.
Okay.
So,
And I'm just curious, again, from a procedural perspective, have you and Bob met with the first selectwoman together and said, perhaps these are, to get to Mr. Walsh's point, Ms. Charlton, and I think you're getting the theme of what the board may want you to focus on moving forward in terms of additional audits, where the town may be able to save additional money through auditing of other areas. Have you met with the CFO on that? Or have the two of you met with
we have not met
the first
with the new-
selectwoman and said, maybe we could, I mentioned this to one of my fellow board members, the town of Trumbull just audited their town cars, and their internal auditor came up with over $2 million worth of savings. So I just, I'm not trying to create more work for you. I'm just trying to say that
Actually, I
It's
am,
an internal
I am in
audit.
the process of looking at
It's an internal audit
the town
function, is
fleet
my
right
point.
now, to be honest with you. It's funny that you say that.
Well, the point being that maybe that would be something, one of a few suggestions you could make
Yeah.
to, the two of you may perhaps suggest to the first selectwoman or the chief of staff, chief administrative officer, whoever, whatever the procedure is in terms of communicating on how, through this audit procedure, the town could realize some cost savings.
Yes, often when I do audits, I do try to find areas where we could levy additional revenue or utilize cost savings at any, at any measure. But we have not met yet with the first select woman to discuss internal audits, but I believe she's going amongst the departments and talking with each department. So I'm sure we're on the list to talk with her.
Okay, Mr. Testani? Thank you. Okay, Mr. Mottola?
So I just want to follow up on that. If you make recommendations, Bob agrees with them, and they're not being implemented, the remedy isn't for that department head to come before the Board of Finance. The remedy is for the first selectman, or first select woman, excuse me, or Bob, as the one overseeing this, is to do something about it, to hold the employee and the department head accountable, and take whatever is necessary. We're not in the position as the Board of Finance to reprimand a department head who's not doing what he or she should be doing. That is an executive function that should be done by the first select woman. And I just think we need to be clear about that. I mean, employees need to be held accountable. And I think in this town, we get away from that at times. That's all.
Okay, thank you. I think what we have is some oversight, and we just need to make sure we exercise that oversight.
But exercising the oversight.
It's not micromanaging. I get what you're saying.
No. And I understand what you're saying too. No, but it is it being complied with? And we get a report that it's being complied with, and if it hasn't been complied with, why not? And what has been the remedy for non-compliance?
Yeah, I agree.
That's it.
That's our role, and that's our oversight. Yep, very good. Do you have a question?
I have a question. You have here as a list of some of what you're doing, assisting the external auditor with the independent DPW audit. So we've talked a lot about DPW, that we don't see that as a priority right now for you, but we feel it needs to be, obviously. Can you talk to us, because there might be a blend here in terms of what you're doing internally to kind of look at the processes for the DPW as you assist the external auditor that we hired. Can you talk about that process for us a little bit in terms of what's going on?
The external auditor had selected a scope of expenditures that he wished to review, and as a result of that, he needed to see backup documentation. So I was assisting him by pulling the backup documentation. He's had an accountant come in, and we showed her how now we're scanning backup documentation, so more recent information can be reviewed on the town accounting system. So we assisted his accountant with that. And then also he had questions regarding policies and procedures, and helping him, giving him copies of those as well, and answering any questions that he had to help him complete his audit. He did come up with a few findings, and as a result of his findings per our discussions, I implemented a snowplow repair policy. These are repairs made to independent contractor vehicles that the DPW garage was performing on independent contractor. When the snowplow broke, they were repairing the vehicle, but then they were billing the contractors. So we set up a policy for that. And then there was also something at the scale house that needed a remedy, and I worked with the solid waste and recycling facility, and we fixed, there was a glitch in the cash register systems, which has been corrected.
Okay. So that was just the internal audit. Now, you also do policies.
The second
Yes.
hour.
The second
Yes.
hour.
Policies.
Yes, I do.
So here's what we won't do. We won't go through every single one of these, line by line. But I will ask the board if there's anything under policies, right, that we would like some further explanation or discussion on. I think Mr. Bateson, amongst others, and I'll just throw the first one out there, are these snowplow repairs to contractor vehicles. I mean, is there a
Yes.
policy on something like this?
Yes, I just wrote that policy, where now if a repair is made to a contractor's vehicle during a snowstorm, we do this as a courtesy because they are plowing our roads, and we want to get the trucks out onto the road as quickly as possible. So Department of Public Works Garage has been repairing the vehicles as a courtesy. They've been billing the contractor. So now I'm requiring the garage supervisor to submit a copy of the work order to the finance department, which details the total cost of the repair, including our labor hours, to the finance department. We're having the contractor submit a credit memo. We're going to agree the credit memo to the work order and process it via finance after we have matched the work order to the credit memo, and all that agrees, we'll apply it to an invoice at that time. Also, I reviewed the mechanic hourly rates and determined that it should be increased. So we increased the hourly rate that we're charging to the contractor to repair the vehicle.
Okay, thank you very much.
That's what I was looking for.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bates.
Yeah, when, is that in writing now?
Yes,
Could you just forward that to Bob so I could?
yes. I actually have a copy of it here with me. If you'd like it, I can give it to you right now.
Yeah, that'll work.
Okay.
Okay.
Just one quick question on the, you've written a number of policies over the years. Is there training? How are the policies maintained? Do they just disappear in a shared drive somewhere, or is there a manual where someone
Well, there's
comes
some
in?
policies we have, we did implement training on an internal, it's called an internal voucher, which is items that departments submit for payment that don't go through purchase requisition or purchase order process. I provided a training to departments for that, providing them with policies. Everything, as I said, is on the shared drive. Oftentimes, if a policy is pretty straightforward, I will send it to the department head. Many times I'll have them sign it and return a signed document back to me to tell me that they have reviewed and acknowledge the policy and will adhere to it.
Okay, and when you're doing your audits, you're auditing to those policies?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Walsh, I see your hand up.
So, was listening to your presentation regarding this snow plow repair. So we have independent contractors, and
Yes.
their trucks break, and we repair their trucks
Yes,
as a courtesy.
yes,
put
we
parts in-
hire
we-
them
we
to.
put parts in their vehicle?
There is usually a snow plow blade
Okay.
and some nuts and bolts, from what I'm told from the
So those are the
garage
only
supervisor.
repairs being made? is
Yes.
To a snowplow blade and to nuts and bolts?
That is correct.
Okay, but we're not fixing their
No, not the
individual
motor or
truck.
engine or anything like that. Usually it's just the blade.
Okay.
And it's very infrequent. Last year, there were no repairs performed at all. The year prior to that, there were 3. So it's not that frequent, but we want to have something in place anyway.
Okay, no, because I just,
Yeah, we're talking about something less than $500 here.
no, it just leaves me to question things like, if we make an improper repair,
Yeah, no, we gotta have cost
and
benefit here.
are we responsible? We get indemnifications, or what do we do? I mean,
Sorry, what?
what happens if we make an improper repair to their vehicle?
We're not repairing the vehicle, they're kind of fixing snowplows that are missing a screw or something.
Is this like usually during a snowstorm? Where
Yes, it's during the snowstorm while the
Like
truck
pulling
is
in when it's-
working on town roads, and to expedite them and get them back out on the road as quickly as possible.
Right, okay.
We'll repair the blade in-house.
Jim, sorry, I'd like to follow up. I know where Walsh is going with this. He's thinking like a lawyer. If we fix the plow, we fix it improperly, plow flies off, demolishes a car. That's what Jim's getting at. So I just hope the policy addresses that there's an indemnification, that it's a courtesy that we want our roads plowed, but there's a hold harmless on the repairs that we do.
Right. Yeah, no, the policy did not include an indemnification.
I don't
Yeah.
want to dismiss
Right.
the liability factor. There is one. We're touching somebody else's material, their equipment. We are liable.
Yeah.
We should all understand that.
And we're charging them.
Well, it's the liability that people are discussing. It needs to be weighed, and if we should even do it. So
Right,
it's something
right.
that,
Well,
it's something you
that
guys
is
have to
something
look
that-
at.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Any other town, these are the townwide policies that you put in place this year. Well,
Yes.
in 19,
Right.
okay. Any other policies anyone would like to review?
And the other things that are just come up on an as hot basis that you're asked to handle?
The financial accounting?
Accounting and other,
Right.
okay. That are not part of your job description? They're just things you were asked to do?
Correct. It kind of blossomed over the years.
Yeah.
I missed this before, but I saw that you put in place a scrap metal policy,
Yes.
and that's always a notorious subject.
Yes,
We
that's-
always hear about scrap metal issues, frauds, et
Right.
cetera. Did that policy, what did that stem from? Did it stem from an audit where you found an issue? How did that come about?
well,
And what do
initially,
we do?
it
What is meant
stemmed
to cover?
From several years ago when there was an issue in monies collected from scrap metal, and there was question as to where, if the money was properly handled, whether it was properly deposited, and how, so a scrap metal policy was developed. And basically, at this time, the Department of Public Works has been notified that they are not to handle any cash as a result of any scrap metal that they encounter during work, and that they bring to the scrap metal facility. The scrap metal facility is to submit a check directly to Finance Department for deposit. There will be no handling of cash at any, or check at any time by Department of Public Works employees.
Well, follow-up, though. What about scrap that ends up at someone's driveway? Scrap that's, yeah, well, it was scrap. It came from a different job site.
Oh.
It ended up at our facility, at our property, and from
Right.
our property, I'm talking about the town's property,
Yeah.
ended up at someone's home.
Right. The town charter does have a code of ethics which covers what employees can and cannot take, including items, I believe it's over $100 in value or something. So I believe that employees would be covered under the town code of ethics.
Okay. Okay.
The policy that you created is only for metal, right?
Yeah, that would just cover the scrap metal because the employees weren't sure how to handle it and what they should do, so I created something for them to follow.
So basically, all the metal that comes onto our site is the town of Fairfield's metal, correct?
I'm not sure about that. I'd have to,
What do you mean you're not sure of that?
I don't
So-
know.
so we have people drop off metal and
At
we-
the solid waste and recycling facility?
Yeah.
Yes, that would be town property.
Okay.
Yes, but I believe sometimes the fellas, when they're working on the roads, or they'll find scrap metal in those types of locations, and they'll take it to the scrap metal yard to, so they can obtain funds.
For themselves.
Well, no, now,
Or for the town. I'm
the check
giving you an
comes
option.
directly to the finance department. There's no,
It's not going where it should.
it's not going to the Department of Public Works or any other location.
Any other questions? Mr. Testani?
Yeah, real quick, I just had a quick thing on the police. You say that you assist the police department with the preparation of the ECC budget
Yes.
for fiscal year '21. Help me understand, what did you do for them exactly?
Well, now they are hiring some employees from Westport. They're combining the ECC departments, so there'll be new
For the
employees.
regionalization you're talking about?
Right, the regionalization. There'll be more expenses as a result of that, and they needed assistance in preparing how much will it cost the town to run this regionalization of the two towns together as
But
one.
the department budget itself isn't something you've audited in the past, the police department budget? Or,
In the past, no, I have looked at parking violation revenue for the police department and the burglar alarm ordinance, other types of
because I know, at least again, from my previous experience, that the car situation was different for police than it is for the town, on the town side, because of the usage. So, I don't know, again, that perhaps might be something for the future to consider is, I don't know what the lease program is for police. Is it 5 years, 3 years? I'm not sure, but
For the vehicles?
yes, yeah.
We own all the town vehicles. They're purchased outright.
The police.
For the
vehicles.
police vehicles, yes,
We own them, okay.
Yes.
We don't lease them, okay.
correct.
And have we reviewed that? I guess similar question to the town side.
The police vehicles?
Yeah.
We do an annual fixed asset inventory, but other than that, we haven't done any review of their vehicles.
When we buy vehicles, we own all our vehicles. B, when we buy vehicles, we do our best to get the best price available for the vehicles. And the ECC work, we're talking about developing the business plan and the financial statements for the combined business.
What do we do with the older vehicles? Do we auction them? Do we?
Yeah, when we basically, they go from police to minimal use and fire to town to junk, or to sale.
Mr. Testoni, you okay? All right. Well, thank you for being here, and we learned a lot, and you're going to be
Thank
coming
you.
back before us
That's fine.
much sooner.
I look forward to
in
it.
3 years, okay? We'll
And
probably see you in a few months.
Yes.
I think what we learned is we have a decision to make as a board on how much time, money, effort, and support we want to put into this whole process to support your efforts. You know, for me, I see this is definitely more than a 60% job, which, well, is it 40% only? On the internal audit and the policies and everything is 40%? Okay, so we need to figure this out. And I think it's appropriate, yes, for the audit committee to work with you, work with Mr. Mayor, come back and report to the Board of Finance on what you think the next step should be, on how we should move forward with this, because as Mr. Walsh had mentioned earlier and others, everything you do comes back with a fix. And the issue is, I think, authority, you know, how much teeth go into your recommendations, and follow-up, just based on time,
Right.
not based on effort.
Right.
And so it's something that we need to address, and we'll wait for the audit committee to come back in and report to us,
Okay,
okay? So, thank you very much.
thank you.
Okay, item number 4, to hear an update on the 2020 reassessment and revaluation, and we have our town attorney, Mr. Attorney Baldwin, with us, and others. Just Mr. Murray, and we have just a little background here. So at the December 18th Board of Selectmen meeting, the Board of Selectmen was asked to consider and authorize the purchasing authority to enter into a contract with Municipal Valuation Services for property valuation services for the October 2020 grand list, right? In an amount not to exceed $253,000 that we as a board approved. And we approved part of it in this current budget season, in this current budget. I think we approved $100,000. So anyway, during that discussion at the Board of Selectmen, a motion was made to amend the item and have the town attorney review the Town Charter 8.3D and determine if the Board of Finance is required to review the agreement at this time before its implementation. So the town attorney has requested review the charter. He has made an opinion. We have it with us. It's in our package. And he's here to review his overall opinion on the role and authority of the Board of Finance, I believe, at this time. And you went deeper than that, I believe, Attorney Baldwin. But first, just want to welcome you here.
Thank you.
First time before us, Board of Finance, first time on many, so we're glad to have you, and thank you, Mr. Murray, thank you for being here, too. So if there's anything that you want to add to my introduction, please do, and then we can move forward.
Before we start, and I just want everyone to be on the same page. If this is a general conversation, I could participate in it. But one of the principals of the company that won the RFP, I've represented in the past before, so I want that on the record. So I will not vote if I was chosen on that specific contract. And I don't really want to talk about that. But if we're just having a general conversation, I could stay for the proceeding just to talk about what the process is. So I just not sure where this is going, but I wanted to get this on the record. So if we're talking about general stuff, but if we're going to start talking about the contract at issue, I'm going to have to recuse myself.
I believe it's general. It's
Okay.
a charter issue. It's a big,
Okay.
big question is how this board proceeds
Okay.
now and going forward. So essentially, my conclusion is with regard to the specific question presented, that is whether or not this board needs to review the contract before it can be implemented, I'm certain that it does not. It still begs the question as to the role of this board in setting out the parameters or the nature and the scope and maybe even the methodologies of that reassessment or reevaluation. But now is not the time. The time to do that would be at the time that it's presented, the expenditure is presented to the board to be considered, to be appropriated for that purpose, and ask questions at that time. And you do have the right, and I believe the authority, to implement methodologies or to dictate methodologies which are in conformance with state statute and regulations. It doesn't mean you can choose the company. It doesn't mean that you can review the details of the contract. That, in essence, is my opinion.
When we did gave the first amount of money, did we talk about that stuff? Did we talk about the methodologies and how they might be different from the last time?
I believe that it was a cursory review by this board for this situation, but in 2014, which is the reason why I included it in the backup, there was extensive discussion about the nature and extent and even the methodologies to be used for the reval.
Yeah, I thought, my recollection is when we approved the first amount of money, that the cursory review we're talking about was, I believe the assessor was here, but I believe Bob presented it.
The assessor was here, I was here.
And you basically said, we need this money to start getting ready for the next assessment.
And there was a discussion, most of the members of this board have been on the board a long time, and there was an incredible educational experience when we did the prior one, 2014, because the prior one was a full valuation.
A full valuation.
With every site.
Yes.
Visit to every site. And so I think it was like, I forget how much money it cost, $500,000, $600,000, $700,000. I mean, it was a big number.
At the end of the day, it was between $700,000 and $800,000.
Yeah. So that number jumped out. And as a result of that, there was a considerable number of questions, a lot of explanation, a lot of discourse, and a lot of education about the different ways to do an audit, not to do evaluation and not to do evaluation. So that was the big issue. When this came before the board 5 years ago, 1 year ago, it was fully explained that this was not a full audit, not a full valuation, but a partial valuation. And that's why it was X number of dollars less. And I think most members of the board, having been on the board 5 years earlier, or 4 years earlier, understood that and passed on it. You know, and to pass the 100. Basically, at the time, we were thinking it was going to be $250,000 to $300,000, and we selected it like a third of. We thought we'd be using a third of the hours the first year, so that was the reason that $100,000 was put into the budget for the first year.
Okay. I will tell you that I had no idea when we were voting on that that was our one opportunity. If that's your legal position, that was our one opportunity to have input on what was going to be done.
Yeah, that's not necessarily what I'm saying.
Oh, okay.
You have that opportunity from time to time, according to the charter provision. That means that you choose the time. It just seems to be an opportune time for the board to consider it, and that's what it's done in the past. But it is up to you to determine when that's going to happen.
So we can still change that?
Technically, you could, but you would perhaps, big problems because the contract has been signed.
Okay.
The monies have been, expended already,
Okay.
and we have a time constraint.
So technically, in all intents and purposes, we don't have a chance at this opportunity.
It wouldn't be practical, I think, is
It
what
wouldn't
you
be
said.
practical. Right.
Okay. I think this board's going to have to go every single time. We're going to have a full review of this. Full review, starting at least a year before a decision has to be made on what process we need to follow. And we're going to have to make a notation of that, because I don't think any of us really knew that what we were really doing. I'm going to follow up.
Legal opinion real quick. I'm going to follow up on this. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Mine is too, so.
Go ahead, Mr.
Jim, you said that the Board of Finance has the authority to investigate and inquire from the tax assessor the means and methodologies used in the property reevaluation process. The means and methodologies are, I think you said, which are set forth in state statute. Is that what you said? Maybe I just misunderstood what you said.
Yeah, I'm sure Mr. Murray could explain further, but there are criteria, there are regulations and state statutes about how to perform a revaluation.
We
And-
just can't
and it's-
create our own means and
that's
methodologies
correct.
that don't comply with state
It's
statute. That's
very
correct.
specific. So you would be choosing from whatever is in that bucket of possibilities. And I'm not here, Ross can explain that better than I can.
And there's not really a bucket of possibilities. The statute reads that we must use generally accepted mass appraisal practices. And then the Office of Policy Management sets out parameters, statistical parameters that have to be met once the project is complete.
Mr. DeWitt?
I'm going to attempt to put a little historical background on it, because you were not town attorney, nor were you tax assessor in 2014, right? So I remember this, and I didn't. Thank you for including this, because it made me, I'm like, why is there 2014? It made me remember. This was the budget, the year that this was going to happen. So this was the second part. The first part tax assessor came before us a year before and said, hey, 5-year, we're going to need $800,000, whatever it was. And we said the first year, yep, here we go, here's the money, no problem. Then the second year, which will be this year, because your budget process this year, right, we'll have the second piece of money for this, right? So we're in the same situation, 2014, 2020, right?
No, 2014 would equate to 2019.
It was the first part of the...
It's the first part. 2014 is equivalent to the 2019 budget process.
So the first
We were
part of the
here-
budget.
here-
Okay, okay, all right. Just so we're all clear, we asked about the process because it was a lot of money. We didn't say we're not going to give you money. We said we just wanted to know more about it. We did approve all the money, right? All the money was approved. And I think Mr. Mayor brings up a good point. We were a less mature board at that point in our lives. And it was the first time we had been through a 5-year reevaluation. So this is a little bit different. But I'm with Mr. Walsh. We didn't know that we were voting on methodology during the budget process, because there's 800,000 things going on in the budget process. And I have my notes from last year. It was just like, hey, why is the number 164,000? Well, 100,000 is reevaluation. Okay, fine. No one said, by the way, if you want to talk about methodology, this is the time. So.
And that can never come up ever again at budget season. Talk about methodology during the budget.
Well, exactly right, because we would.
It's the worst possible time to talk about it.
It couldn't be worse.
Because we could talk about it the entire night.
It's like the discussion about personnel we were having, last month. Oh, I think you should wait till the budget process to talk about personnel. No, that is not the right time to talk about personnel. It is really not, nor is policy. So going forward, we should probably have, like you said, a year in advance or something to just say, hey, guess what? Next 2 budget processes, we're going to see this amount of money. Because I agree, that will take all night.
Mrs. LeClaire?
Did you want to say something, Fred?
Well, I just want to say, how can we make sure that happens? Mr. Mayor?
I'd like to maybe make a comment the charter says that the Board of Finance will choose the system and ensure that it's updated from time to time. The charter doesn't say the process. The charter is focused, my opinion, on the software system and the algorithms that are used. Now, I think what town
Charter
attorney-
said that forever, Bob, before there was software. Okay?
Yeah, if I could,
I mean, seriously.
If I
mean,
could
the charter
comment on
said
that,
that
I-
word before there was software.
I actually did the charter history on this, and it goes back to the very first charter in 1947.
Exactly.
The same language was in there.
So
then.
there was no software.
Stand corrected.
What it did, it borrowed from the statutes, the existing statutes that allowed for assessments to be done, and the exact same language has been there. So I disagree for that simple reason.
got you.
I think it's a compelling reason.
Right, I'll agree with that. But it says
Okay,
that
so
updated from time
The
to
question is
time.
then, how do we make sure this doesn't happen again? There's going to be new members of the board, you know, sooner or later, and they're not going to have the knowledge and the experience that we're going through right now. So how do we ensure? It's going to be up
Well,
to...
it would have to deal with it the same way we deal with capital, not have to, but one of the options is to deal with it the same way we do with non-recurring capital
we're gonna have to
and
rely on-
capital in the waterfall, and have a specific month when we put it on the agenda every 5 years
Okay.
to discuss how we're going to do it the following year.
Waterfall's a great time to do
So for the 19 budget, for example, we would have done it sometime in October, November of 18.
Right, because, you know, we talked about process earlier. Sooner or later, there's going to be brand-new people here, including in every position, right? So we don't want, the future to repeat this
Right.
past. So we need to make sure that we
need to
have
we need
some
to
type...
inculcate it into the system,
Yeah.
using that word again.
Yes. Mrs. Leclerc?
Oh,
Charter.
I was going to say, back in 2014, we didn't agree with Mr. Mr. Lesser's opinion. I think it was Mr. Lesser.
It was
And-
Saxel. I think you're right.
Was it Sax?
I'm pretty
I-
sure.
I don't
No,
know.
Mr. Lesser, it was Attorney Lesser.
No, it wasn't.
And so that was part of why we had so much discussion on that topic. But when we approved our budget this year, I thought we were doing something similar, and that we were setting aside an amount of money so they could go get started on the process. But I thought before an RFP was going to be written and submitted, that they would come back to us and present that, and that was something we had decided on, is that we had input into that process and exactly how detailed an assessment was going to be done, whether it's just a market value assessment or a full door-to-door assessment. I thought that was something our board had input on, and by dollars, we do. And so that's why I'm kind of surprised that it's gotten this far along this year.
That's interesting. What you're talking about is, as the attorney and Ross pointed out, the process itself is limited in scope with respect to how you do it, because you're defined by state statute, you're defined by actuarial regulations and benchmarks, et cetera.
Right.
What is not defined, and what you can do, is you can either have the full site visit process or not. And you could still, what we're doing, what is currently contracted for is a limited site visit appraisal, reval, and if you guys wanted to vote to spend more money to do it the other way, I could probably adjust to that.
Right, the statutes say you must verify the data on the field card once every 10 years. And typically that's done through a physical site visit.
Right,
So
but
this
there
is-
was,
we did that
you know,
5 years ago.
Mrs. Leclerc's right. When we talked about system, 'cause that's the charter word, and system was determined to be walk to house with a piece of paper and fill out the card, or do it by mail. And I remember the discussion, because there was a certain point, and it was at 2015, where we're like, there's no other way to do it except go house to house with a person.
And I think it's actually knocking on the door and getting entry into the house so that you can get inside the house
I
versus
think-
an external.
I
It's an
think you're
internal.
right. Yep.
Didn't we do it that way because that was the first one we had in 10 years, 5 years ago?
That last
Right?
cycle was we needed to do that 10-year
Gotcha.
site visit.
Okay.
We're now 5 years out, so we don't have to do that for another 5.
You could do it if you wanted to, but you don't
So,
have to.
but 5 years, okay, let's,
The
we
extra
can't,
money you could.
I'll call on you. Okay. Mrs. Leclerc?
But, so some years we've had very contentious reassessments because there wasn't a strong real estate market and there wasn't enough data out there to just do market value data. And I think that's where we were thinking that you had to do a little more work, is because if depending on what the volume of sales are, you can,
That's true, but adding a site visit doesn't give you more market data. It provides that the data that you have on that property is more accurate. But if you don't have the sales, going out and visiting houses isn't going to make your result any more accurate, other than that the data is more accurate. The pricing model still needs to be developed from sales.
That's an excellent point. And that's the discussion that should have been involved with this board. That we could have given our insight to what, as residents, what we see, how we feel the realignment of values might, how an increased detailed model might help in appeals. So to that point, I think we should be included in the conversation more upfront.
Right. I think the issue we're having is that we did not have the opportunity to exercise our authority, or we did not know we did not know that what we were discussing was our own, when we were discussing this a year ago, that was the opportunity that we had to exercise our authority, to discuss it anyway,
During a budget meeting.
during a budget meeting. Attorney Baldwin?
The purpose was over the budget, not over talking about anything to do with anything else other than a number.
It is your purview to take it up at any time,
Okay.
to be clear.
We should probably exercise that once a year.
Yes.
Mr. Murray, do you see this as being a contentious situation? Because I do.
I think there's areas of town that have changes in value that
Yeah,
will-
so let's talk about that. Where are those areas of town?
I didn't bring that data with me.
Okay, but I think we could all agree, I mean, you and I can agree, as you know your business, that there's been a dramatic change up in Greenfield Hill, correct, to the
Yep, we've
negative?
had a drop in Greenfield Hill.
What do you think the percentage drop has been?
I wouldn't want to put a number out yet. I haven't, we're just starting to get into the analysis. We're only looking at data from the last 2 years.
Okay.
I'm sorry, the 2-year period from October of 18 through October of 20, so we've really just gotten a year's worth, and we
Okay.
still have another years to gather.
Okay,
And that's the data that matters, not,
okay.
Yeah.
And then the other major area that I could think of, or at least people talk about, and I know our chairman's spoken about it in front of you, has been the number of homes and things that have gone up here in the beach area, where we are right now. But as you correctly pointed out, when new houses go up, you revalue them at that point in time. So there
well,
really,
I wouldn't use the word revalue.
you look at them from the last time, what the data
Right.
shows was from 2015, correct?
Correct. We use the pricing model
Yes.
developed in 15. and
But
we
if the house
evaluate
gets
the house.
built bigger and it increases from a small cape of 1,200 square feet and now can maximize out at 3,400 square feet on the same lot under new construction, you look at what that house would appraise for in 2015 based on that
That's
fact
right.
scenario, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so there's been a lot of those houses, but some of that's been factored in. Because when that happens, you raise the value of that house after the certificate of occupancy's been granted, correct? You guys do your analysis.
Right.
So some of that difference from going to a cape to going through what some people term a McMansion has been factored in already. The only difference that hasn't been factored in is whether the market's has gone up substantially from 2015 to the current time,
Right.
correct? So it shouldn't be as dramatic.
That, it's not gonna,
It's not going to be as
it's not-
dramatic as some think it's going to
It's
be.
not, we're not going from a Cape to the McMansion in one shot. We already
did that.
The large house.
Yes.
And now we're just gonna reflect.
You're looking at market forces from just the
change
period
in-
of time.
Change in value based on the market.
Okay.
Not based on the.
Yes.
what's
So,
there.
to me, that's not going to be as dramatic as what I've seen happen up in Greenfield Hill, which has been a devaluation of, I would say, a pretty decent percent. Which then, if we don't have increases in other percents, we're going to lose grand list, correct?
We have other, I mean, the beach area has done well. It's gone up. Other areas,
Do you think the beach area has gone up by, I know you don't want to put percentages. Do you think the beach area has gone up to the same percentage that Greenfield Hill has gone down? Because I don't see it.
if I had to make a prediction, I would say our grand list will go up.
Will go up.
Yep.
Okay. Okay.
Residential.
Residential.
Haven't gotten enough commercial data or done enough analysis on the commercial side.
Okay. What?
I think residential
surprised by it, yeah.
will go up 1% to 2%.
Okay.
But this is where, and this is why we do a reval,
Mm-hmm.
is to adjust for those changes and shifting in values.
Sure.
So, but as one area goes down and the other goes up, the shift in tax burden is going to be what causes the most angst.
Oh, certainly.
And very often people will get their assessment and say, yeah, that looks pretty good.
Yeah.
And then when the tax bill shows up, that's when they start questioning.
But if the residential, it's all individual. So, I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, because you're talking about the grand list going up, so the average should really, the tax burden should go down slightly if the
Right.
grand list
If
has
the
gone up.
Right, if the grand list goes up 2%,
Yeah.
your house goes up 2%, your tax bill is probably going to be pretty close to the same.
So, still the same, yeah. Okay. So it's going to be the people
Changes
that
the threshold.
are above that that are going to suffer, and the people that are below that might actually have a nice surprise. When something like that happens, does the methodology matter to the people who are coming to your office to complain?
No.
It doesn't?
Not
Okay.
at all.
No hesitation in that respect.
How about when you have to go to court on these things for the people that appeal them? If they don't
Typically, when
if
you-
they don't find justice at the Board of Assessment Appeals, or what they call justice, does it matter at courts what type of assessment's done on likelihood of success for the taxpayer or not?
When you say, once we end up in court, we're usually at that point getting an appraisal. And, a mass appraisal is different than a residential appraisal. Residential appraisal, you're taking your 3, 4, 5 best comps and developing a value. Mass appraisal, we're taking all the sales in town, developing a pricing model to price all the unsold properties, the properties that didn't sell in that time period. So, different process.
Okay.
So, once we end up in court, we're usually getting to doing an appraisal.
To what? I didn't hear the end.
Usually doing an appraisal at that point.
You do your own appraisal.
I don't do them, no. We have
Well,
outside.
We hire somebody
We hire
to do
an
them
outside party, yes.
for our council to use in its representation of the town on that.
Correct.
Okay. I have no further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Any other questions? Just, Mr. Pistani?
Yeah. Attorney Baldwin, so just to clarify, you're in agreement? I'm just trying to figure out the differences between what you summarized in your letter and Mr. Lesser's. It looks similar, is that fair to say?
It's similar, but it's not completely in line. Mr. Lesser's opinion was more like that of Bob's. Hey, I'm new. So,
Hello, Mr. Murray, by the way. How are you? Moving from Trumbull, or Trumbull days.
Yeah,
some,
vaguely.
Been a while.
Been a while.
Go ahead, I'm
so
sorry.
to answer your question, in my opinion, the board does have input as to the methodologies, whereas the previous town attorney's opinion was that it does not. and
We
it was
didn't,
based
right?
solely
So that
upon-
was the purpose for tonight.
I was
Is that,
asked to
am I right
present,
with that?
yeah.
For you to decide that we had the authority to,
Well, technically, I was asked to answer the question whether or not you need to review this contract that was approved by the Board of Selectmen, and the answer is, no, you do not, in order for that to be implemented. That was the question presented, but we got into this other
so
aspect.
it could be implemented whether we review it or not, is what you're saying?
That's correct.
Right, and that's what we've been discussing, is how it got this far, and how we're going to avoid that next time, which we're going to put a process in place to ensure that this never happens again. Right. But your view on this is slightly different than Mr. Lesser's. Yours is broader. I think what I'm hearing is that in your opinion, the Board of Finance's authority exceeds that of what Mr. Lesser thought.
I'm sorry?
That our authority, right, and our role exceeds that than what Mr. Lesser had presented.
You could put it that way, but you have to put it in the context of what your options are at the time that
Right.
you're discussing this methodology, because I'm not sure.
Timing is
that it's
everything.
but I'm not sure whether your choices are that great.
Right.
But that's for another day and discussion by Mr. Murray.
Okay. Okay.
So
Mr.
you
Mayor?
think we have more than just choosing the computer system?
I do.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd like
Okay, 'cause
to,
we've heard that before. I thought that was
Well, I
bullshit.
think you bring up a
but
good
Yeah,
I've heard that before, and that's exactly what I thought of it.
Okay, strike that from the record.
before I was,
We didn't believe it. But I think you bring up a good point about 1947, and so,
yeah, no, that was, before I was corrected about the word system in 1947, I was not going to say the board had no authority to review the process. I think my position with respect to this board for the whole time I've been in this position is, since you vote on the funding of everything, you have the power of the purse string on everything that comes before you. And if you don't like the process,
we could not fund.
you can just not vote on the funds to, so what I was going to say, and I finished, is you guys, even
But the
though-
problem is if the RFP, say we wanted to spend money on, which I'm not saying we do, but if we wanted to do the full one again, the $800,000 version, and we're only getting brought authority for a $400,000 and an RFP that's specifically designed for that, what's our authority at that point? Just not to
Well, no,
approve it at all?
What I'm saying is, the language in the charter versus the power of the purse is, they overlap, is what I'm saying. And it's a matter, as the attorney Baldwin points out,
Yeah.
it's a matter of timing. And when.
But this
And
said,
I-
go ahead, I'm sorry. Sorry, Jim.
Wait, hold on. You can't just call out
Yes,
because
sir.
it just causes chaos here. So, Mr. Walsh, are you finished?
No, I mean, I feel a lot better. I mean, I understand there seems to be two systems. Maybe we could talk in the future whether there's more than two systems. I mean, there's the one we're about to enter into for this coming year, which apparently we had approved unbeknownst to us at the last budget meeting, last year's budget. And there was the one that was done 5 years before this. I'm not saying that we have to do the more detailed one every single time. I think there's a reason why the state statute says we have to do a full one once every 10 years. So we seem to be an every other year type of thing. But I think we should at least have discussions about it.
Right, which we'll make sure that we will from now on. Thank you. Mrs. Leclerc?
Could you walk us through the timeline of this a little bit? My understanding is what we approved in the budget last year was only $100,000. So how can we sign a contract now if they only have $100,000 approved? Don't we need to finish approving the rest of the funds before you sign a contract?
And all the contracts have non-appropriation clause, which means if the town does not properly fund, the contract is void.
And it's in there.
Yes.
It's in the
It's
contract.
in every contract I signed that's more than a year. Or not that I signed, but the town signed.
If I may just add one thing with respect to Mr. Lesser's opinion, he did address the same question as I read it that I was asked, or that's how he presented it, which is a question of whether or not the board could choose the contractor and/or approve the contract. And in that respect, I completely agree with his opinion. I just want to be clear about that. And in his opinion, he also said that they welcomed participation by board members at the RFP process, and with respect to this board, making sure that if you vote for, say, a full revow as opposed to a partial, as you proposed, Mr. Walsh, then, and that was not done in the RFP, well, that's your opportunity, if you participate in the RFP process, to interject. And I think that you would have plenty of time to probably thwart that effort to do something other than what this board wanted.
I understand. How are we supposed to know about the RFP process on this? We were never notified of that. I mean, that's part of the, I understand what your words all sound great, but in process, we had no idea an RFP was written. We had no idea that it was out there. We didn't know how many people had applied, you know, anything. That was all done, that's all done internally through the purchasing department, and they never give us any notice of it.
Correct?
Correct? No one comes to us and say, hey, here's the language from the RFP that we'd like to put out. What do you guys think about it?
I would suspect that at the time that you authorize the funds in the next go-around, you'll be sure to request that you be notified when the RFP is going out.
Right, because this will come up every year now. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Mr. Testani, did you have a question?
No, I'm good.
You're good? Okay.
I mean, the great thing about the selection process is we're not responsible for it. Talk to your select people.
Okay. Any further questions, comments? Thank you, Mr. Murray. Thank you, Attorney Baldwin.
Thank you.
Okay, we're on to item number 5, which is growing to be their biggest nightmare here. To hear an update on the issues relating to the fill pile. So, Mr. Carey, thank you for being here. A regular.
There was no material related with this agenda.
I didn't see anything.
Right?
This is just an update on where we stand.
Yep.
On the financials and where we stand with.
Just a quick update, Brian Carey, Conservation Director for the town. So I'm not here requesting any more money tonight.
Wow.
We're still
Happy New Year.
Yeah, we're still working within the money that's been appropriated by the board. We finished Jennings remediation yesterday, so that's all back open to the school as of yesterday. We're still finishing delineation at Gould Manor. You can see some of the flags that are out there. We're having some internal discussions about the next steps because it is more extensive and it's really not a fill pile issue. There's been arsenic that's been detected in the soil, so we're having some internal discussions about that. We do have additional remediation sites that are going out to bid, one being Osborne Hill School, which we're getting a remedial action plan developed for that. The other is, for the short time frame, is Old Dam Road behind the tennis ball. There's some PCBs there. As far as the fill site, the landfill site, just a quick update on that. We do have a consultant interviews tomorrow morning with 4 qualified firms, and then we'll shortlist two or three firms and basically ask for proposal to respond to the NOV that was submitted by the DEP in the beginning of November. Our town attorney and outside counsel and myself are currently working on a response to the NOV, which is due to the DEP next week, which will be, broad in its nature, just asking for more time, and that we're hiring a consultant to develop a sampling plan for the landfill site, and that's basically where we are at the moment.
Mr. DeWitt?
There was something in some media about the berm. What's up with the berm? I mean, we don't officially have a what's the word I'm looking for? A permit, thank you.
Yep, that's correct.
Is the berm in jeopardy of not being able to stay the berm?
I can't answer that question right now. That's part of our response to the NOV is to do investigation of the berm itself. And then basically our next step is to develop a sampling plan that's going to be basically negotiated or consulted with the DEP before we go up and do any further investigation. The DEP has expressed that they would like us to submit a request to withdraw the existing permit application so that we can basically finish the investigation and come up with a global solution based on the results of the investigation on how best to deal with the final closure of the landfill itself.
And this company that you're interviewing tomorrow, that is going to help us with the notice.
4 companies.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
4 companies, that'll turn into one, hopefully. That's going to help us with the notice of violation. In rough terms, and I know you don't know dollar specific, but is this a $500,000 effort or $2,000 effort?
So basically, the first thing they'll do is come in and do a file review of all of the background issues at the site dating back to even before the whole Julian matter became prominent in town. Again, we've discussed that in the past. There are historical issues at that site prior to the town having Julian operate the site. So as part of a global resolution to the capping and closure of that solid waste unit, they'll have to do a full file review, look at all documentation, so I'm assuming that's going to take them some time. Based on that, they'll put together a sampling plan that will be reviewed and approved by the DEP, and based on that sampling plan, I'll be able to come back and basically ask for funds to fund that sampling plan and the implementation of that at the landfill. So again, this is going to be a stepped process. I will, as soon as costs become a factor or we need to get costs approved, I'll bring those requests back to the board, even before we move forward with selecting the contractor. The idea of shortlisting 3 contractors is that it's just not an apples to apples response between contractors. And if you were to read the NOV, it's very open-ended. It's 2 pages, and it's asking for a lot of things that is, again, very open-ended. So we're going to basically write a proposal once we shortlist the 3 firms and kind of get their understanding about how they would tackle the problem, and then supply, what they believe would be cost associated with that. The firms that we did shortlist have expertise in 2 things that we need. Obviously, just as there's different types of lawyers who handle tax or, environmental or whatever, there's different type of environmental consulting firms that have focuses on specific issues. And our specific issues are PCB investigation and solid waste closure. So the firms that we've shortlisted and their qualifications are people that have broad experience dealing with not only the Connecticut DEP, but Region 1 EPA on PCB investigation and closure.
So you just said, and I just want to make sure I'm 100% clear. We're going to down select, then we're going to pick one company. They're going to be responsible for a global resolution.
That's correct.
So this is I don't want to say it's the last step, but we're getting closer, right? So this company's going to say, we're going to take the whole problem and we're figuring what we got to do.
What we're talking about right now is just the landfill site. We're not
No,
talking
I'm
about off-site issues.
No, I get
Yes,
it, right.
correct.
I'm just, right now I'm worried about
That's right. That is correct.
Richard White Way.
So the process, and just to oversimplify it, is we hire the consulting firm, we put together a sampling plan, we get buy-in from the DEP about what that sampling plan looks like. It's going to require most likely putting in monitoring wells. There's a thing in the NOV talking about sampling sediments. That's very open-ended. So we're going to have to put together a plan that basically, conceptual site model that basically meets the requirements of what the DEP is asking us to do. We will have costs associated with that sampling plan, the implementation of that sampling plan. Once we go out there and collect that data, we will now be able to understand what the implications of the regulatory framework that we're going to have to work under to come up with a final solution to the closure of that site. You know, I don't want to talk about best case or worst case scenarios because then I'll.
No, listen, to be honest with you, I don't want to even talk about scenarios.
Yeah.
All I want to know is that we're going to hire a company and they're going to get us to the end.
That is the goal, is that the same company that can investigate PCBs and meet the requirements of the NOV is the same company that has the, you know, not only the environmental consultings through the LEP, but the professional engineering experience to put together a closure plan and permit application that can be reviewed and properly approved by the DEP so that we can come to a resolution. And I'm hoping to, you know, have that plan and costs in place to be able to get a shovel in the ground. Best case scenario would be like March timeframe.
Thank you.
Listen to it. Okay, Mr. Bateson?
Yeah, thank you. Last meeting, you said something that really freaked me out about when Deep was down there. This goes to the berm. And they were down there with backhoes testing. Okay, that elevated it to a level that, you know, I understand when we're out at Gould Manor, scraping soil up, you know, little spade, this, backhoe. I'm nervous about that. And at the time, I think at that meeting, you said you weren't there on site.
No.
Okay. When I was on the Board of Selectmen, Timniak and I would have, you know, a discussion about this, about what was our exposure when all this started to unravel? And this is our town landfill. It's been in operation for 75 years. Of course, there's stuff down there. When this started to unravel and we realized that there was misdeeds and things went wrong, we understood. But now I'm in a position, it's getting serious. Deep's down there. Now I've got a state agency breathing down my throat. How do I start to protect the taxpayer? Where do I go as a town to give you guys resources? Like, we should have been on site. We maybe hire past DPW employees to come down and say, hey, wait a second. You remember that storm in 1962 and UI dumped those transformers there to, like, you know what I mean? So there's a lot of town history down there that, I mean, Deep's got a backhoe on the ground.
So that investigation was basically done under a warrant, and I don't know if the town attorney wants to talk about
No,
this,
I get it, Brian, but I'm...
What they're going to do with the warrant in their investigation of the site they're going to do what they want. They have a warrant. Me sitting there and telling them what
How are we going to protect ourselves? I mean, as a town, I want to comply,
criminal
and I want to clean
investigation,
up.
which I'm not privy to, and what we're going along with the NOV, I don't know what the DEP is doing and the criminal investigation.
And that's fine, but
has
maybe
nothing to do with
as some sort of guidance here, I really think that we're getting into dark waters here where, as a town, I want to start standing up and say, well, wait a second, guys. We realize there's something went wrong here, but this is a landfill.
We're taking the necessary steps right now to comply with the NOV that was issued to the town, and, you know, there's some room for negotiation.
Okay, I'm
about
just
the
venting. I
response.
just want to make sure that, you know, this is getting serious. I mean, what are we going to get, a 400-page document of stuff? We don't know what they found there. We don't. And I'm, as somebody that was very up close to this situation, I'm scared of what is going to be found. And I'm like, okay, whose fault is it? Is this stuff that's been there for 30 years? I don't know. And it scares me that Deep was down there unsupervised by us potentially, our resources getting in there and say, hey, wait a second. You know, this is where this happened in 1970. So I remember Hurricane Sandy. That place was a disaster down there with crews working, disassembling stuff. I mean, that was essentially a staging area. So that's my 2 cents.
Right. Mr. Mottola?
So, and I know what Ed's saying, I agree with him. So, if none of this ever happened, Brian, People were doing what they're supposed to be doing with this, with Julian and so on and so forth. The issues we're dealing with right now may have never come to light. Is that a fair statement? And we're dealing with this now because we have a notice of violation.
Correct.
That's it, right?
We would still have a requirement under the solid waste laws, though, to close that solid waste unit.
When?
Properly.
Like
Normally,
years from now?
normally that is done through a notice of violation. So at some point, DEP would come down and say,
You gotta close.
you have a solid waste unit here, you know, historically, you're gonna have to close this eventually. Probably would not have been being done under, you know, there's a PCB component here, which is what the NOV was issued through the PCB division. And there's also solid waste component here. So we're trying to kind of marry those two issues so that we can kind of come up with a solution that is forward-looking, that meets the requirements of what the PCB division's kind of requesting us to do, and that, you know, I'm waiting for the solid waste unit to kind of weigh in, and hopefully we can come up with a solution that basically satisfies all of those requirements.
So what they want you to do is withdraw the permit application for the berm and couple that with what you're doing right now with respect to the capping process.
That's,
what they want to do?
that is basically, that is what the person who has been reviewing the solid waste permit has requested the town to do. Which I think at this point is prudent. Doesn't mean that if we go through the whole process of investigation, best case scenario, we do find a couple hot spots that maybe could be excavated and removed, that we can't follow through with that permit. I mean, it will, you know, there was a letter of insufficiency during the DEP's cursory review that was issued 6 months after we'd submitted the permit. So they came back with a 2 or 3 page letter saying, we need all this additional information. We'd obviously have to satisfy those requests, but most of those were planning issues, you know, side slopes and things like that. There was always an intention, and in speaking with Joe Michelangelo, to go back there and install wells after the permit was kind of issued.
Mr. Walsh, you have something?
So I just want to be clear.
Yeah.
This is going to handle the berm and the site itself, both.
So basically, we're going to lay out a map.
Yep.
And one of the problems, and I've said this before about the nature of a landfill or solid, you know,
Yeah.
is that you can't put a drill rig necessarily through it because there's brick and concrete, and like if I spin an auger and put discrete sampling, it's just going to hit refusal. So you have to get a large excavator out there to dig it down. But once you start getting down, it starts collapsing in on itself. So it's technically, it's like almost impossible to some degree to get discrete sampling, meaning that I know for 8, 12 4-foot intervals or 2-foot intervals where the waste is located. So that's going to present some challenges, and that's a technical issue that we're going to have to address with the DEP, because, again, it's a difficult sampling to do it that way. But the berm itself is, side slopes, and you could punch into it. It's the area behind that. There's still a great deal of fill material. So we're going to sit down with the DEP and, just, real simply say, here's a map. This is where we're going to sample for. These are the locations we're going to sample. We're going to put wells in here, to address groundwater or migration issues. And, these are the constituents we're going to sample for. Basically develop what they call a conceptual site model about how the waste was placed there and how the waste, we'll be looking at pathways of exposure and things like that, and how those are all being addressed through global resolution to the issue.
Thank you.
Mr. DeWitt?
Just really quickly. Sounds to me like Mr. Bates's question, what happened in 1960, what happened in 1970 is it just happened and we got to deal with it because we have a landfill, right? Are we keeping these stuff, is there two columns? Here's all the here's all the stuff that Julian did, and here's all the stuff that we did prior to Julian, just in case we can ever, in any stretch of the imagination, recoup the Julian stuff? And I know it's not easy, right?
No, yes, and that is absolutely true. We're keeping well-defined lists, but one of the things is that, we're finding areas where Julian fill may be placed, and then it's coming in, and we're finding secondary contamination that we know that fill wasn't placed there. There's not a lot of spots in town where there was fill placed using Julian material from the aggregate pile that was, larger than 40, 60 yards, which is a lot of material, but most of the spots are, less than 10 yards. So we don't have these huge fill areas. And some of the areas that fill was used in are areas that are historically filled to begin with. The fire training center is examples, that is landfill. And, most of the area around the wastewater treatment plant or the public works yard is landfill. So, even if Julian material is placed there, it's commingled waste material. And that that poses a problem.
Got it, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
That's not, and I just want to be clear, that is not an issue that is specific to Fairfield. I mean, most towns along the coast have landfilled areas that have been reclaimed and filled, and similar issues arise routinely when they're doing any type of work.
So, Mr. Mayor, do you have any updates on the financial aspects of this that we should know about? Like when we're going to have to write our next check? Or approve funds?
Well, as Mr. Carey has indicated, there's a lot we don't know yet because we're still doing a lot of testing. But as far as the known elements, the one where there might be some additional expenses as they keep testing out on the edges is the Cold Manor. So that could, as far as compared to the estimates you had for the known projects.
So
what I feel like now is we don't have any idea where this is headed or what it's going to cost, right?
I'm trying to get my hands around that, and I know that's hard. I keep saying that. But right now, to date, all I can do is basically, a lot of this is based on quantities. And, the more we test, the more, whether it's Julian related or not, we are going to uncover. But right now, to date, the monies that have been encumbered is $922,000, 531. So that involves everything that's been either remediated or investigated to date related to off-site since this whole thing started in August, really.
That's encumbered.
That's encumbered. I could break it down.
No, it's fine.
Yeah, it's coming in, but the board has, I believe, approved up to $1.2 million. So I don't envision probably another month from now, we're going to have another, again, 2 more remedial action plans. We're going to go forward with, obviously, the Osborne Hill School. That's going to be done during February break. I'll have costs associated with that. We're working on that right now. And then the Old Dam Road facility. The one concern is obviously the PCBs were, the prime issue with the material that was on site that was dumped. We haven't found PCBs in any of the sites that we have investigated in the community other than the one that was behind Old Dam Road. And there's anecdotal evidence to suggest that that might have been from a transformer spill that occurred, in the late 80s, early 90s. We're actually working on completing a file search at the DEP in the spill files because there is some evidence that was reported to the DEP when it was cleaned up. So there should be a record on that. And if that's important to be able to go back to the DEP with and show them that, yes, this is maybe from another source.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Testani?
And the DPW workers, do you know if that was done, or has that piece been completed?
For the monitoring?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that Yale's coming on Monday to have interviews with some of the frontline workers and people to kind of start building a medical monitoring program around that.
Okay, so that hasn't been completed as of
No,
yet, okay.
It's in the
So-
works, though.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think perhaps it's time to organize a site visit for the members here that may like to take a walkthrough, preferably on a Saturday, so we don't have to go back to work afterwards, right? And if you could just come back to us, come back to Mr. Mayor with some options,
Sure.
okay? And, you know, at least 2 to 3 options for us, and then we can choose a time slot.
Not a problem.
All right, so if we can do that within a week, you take a look at your schedule, and Mr. Mayor will get back to us.
We're talking about DPW operations,
Right.
not just the pile, right?
I think
I see him enough.
whatever you think.
I don't need to
is
see him,
worthwhile
yeah, right.
seeing.
I'm not here
I'm gonna
this
try to get
weekend,
by
but
with
the
a white
following
ticket.
weekend, I'm more than available to give you a
On the
tour
weekend?
of the whole facility.
Yeah, that'd be perfect. Okay, so, yeah, whatever you think is worth us
Yep,
taking us
absolutely.
through. Okay, any further questions for, yes, Mr. Charles?
With respect to the fill pile operations as they were, the materials that were being brought in there, what is the town doing now? Are we taking everything off-site somewhere and,
So most of the materials that the town was bringing in there was millings. I mean, there was a lot of aggregate, but we're breaking it down on site and basically source separating it. A lot of the excess recycled materials we generated was millings. So the millings are actually being handled as the roads are being milled. We have an agreement with Tilcon to actually take them back. One of the problems with paving roads is that sometimes the paving contractor, which is Tilcon, will accept the millings for no cost. Sometimes there's a charge. So one of the things that the fill pile historically was used for was actually staging millings to either have them recycled or reused where they could be reused appropriately, or so that they could be basically brought up to North Branford or another Tilcon facility in the winter when things were kind of slower. So we actually have had some space issues, and in August they did put millings in the Lake Mohegan parking lot. We got a lot of complaints about that, which I understand. So we basically were running all that material back up to the Tilcon facility at no cost, but we're just doing the trucking. So those are costs that are going to have to be borne by the town when we do those types of paving projects. It's not it's not something that's unique to the town of Fairfield. All towns kind of have that issue with the recycling, and so does the state. The other stuff, catch basin waste cleanings, we're in the process of screening that and testing it, and if it needs to go to a certified facility for disposal, we'll be doing that. Stored on site, covered, and basically we meter it out and get rid of it as we can. And then the last thing is there is a lot of commingled type of aggregate. We'll bring a company in to, through a bid to basically break that down, screen it, and reuse it for road base where we can on certain projects. It's a reusable product. It's not something we would put in like a park or anything like that. But it is, again, it's something we need to be cognizant of going forward about how we are managing our recyclable materials.
thank you.
Okay, any further questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, we're on item number 6, to hear, consider, and act upon any communications. I do have one or two. Oh, Attorney Baldwin, sorry.
Yeah, I thought I was also going to give you an update on
Yeah, you can.
legal issues.
Sure.
Sorry, I know you're thrilled to stay around.
Give us some more good news.
Oh, good, there's more.
I'll be brief. I'll try to be brief. The litigation, the arbitration itself is still set to go forward in May. and we're moving ahead with that as far as the town is concerned. That's our intent. I don't know if Brian mentioned that Julian also received an OV, a notice of violation. I don't know if he mentioned that to you. It's an interesting twist. It was issued the same time that ours was issued, and they're very similar in nature, and it has ramifications that will possibly play out. We'll see. But it's just interesting, and I consider it to be a positive development because they are liable as far as the DEP is concerned as much as the town is.
So they got a notification of violation of our site?
They did.
They were running the
Oh,
site.
Yes.
yeah, I'm just
Yep.
want to be clear.
Yep.
Oh, wow,
Appropriately so.
that's good.
And the implications of that, I'm not going to,
No, I don't want you to elaborate, I just wanted to be clear it wasn't something else, right?
nope. Same date as ours, October 31st.
Oh,
Almost identical. The town does have a public officials liability policy, and that pertains only to third-party claims that are made against the town. And there was previous opinion and declination of coverage by our carrier, Chubb, that said that we were not covered, but that was under a different component of our liability policies, and so I'm going to pursue that with Chubb, and I think that we've got a chance of getting some coverage, perhaps at least coverage of legal fees, if nothing else, and that would be a positive. Finally, I wanted to bring to your attention that the town charter provision, section 5.3, regarding official bonds. I have copies if you want it, or I can read it to you, or I can summarize for you this late in the evening. It basically requires the Board of Selectmen to have bonds for certain town officials, the town clerk, treasurer, tax collector, building official, and such other officers or officials as may be required to do so by the Board of Selectmen. And that policy was apparently abandoned and has not been followed. The implications of that, I think, are very clear to us right now, because it's like a performance bond. Had this been in place, I firmly believe that we would have been able to redeem or turn in those bonds for their value as applied to the misdeeds or the malfeasance or negligence of certain town officials who would likely be covered by those bonds. So it's something that the first select woman fully intends to reinstate as it should be and as it's mandated by charter.
So, when is the last time you think anybody was covered under this bond?
I asked
any
Mr. Hibson, I think it was, you can speak to that.
The last one I remember was when we hired the prior tax collector, which was in like 12. And I think it was shortly after that the decision was made by the risk manager and
I'm sorry, by who?
the risk manager
Okay.
in conjunction, obviously, with the first selectman, that the fiduciary insurance policies were a adequate replacement.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear.
Substitute.
Inadequate?
An adequate substitute.
Adequate,
Adequate substitute.
okay.
But of course, that's only as it concerns third-party claims or claims against the town, and not the same purpose of a surety bond that the charter requires. That's all I've got.
and you just said the charter makes it, this is
Yes,
the charter
section-
thing, so we
section
were
5.
violation of the charter.
Section 5.3. I have copies if you want.
Well, but we're in
I'm sure you have
violation of the charter.
Would the board like copies?
Is there anything else, Juan?
So, Jim, the Board of Selectmen voted to reinstitute that? Is that what happened?
I don't know what happened.
Well, you don't have to
No,
vote to
recently.
reinstitute it. They just made the decision to follow the charter. So
Okay, okay, so
go
It'll
through
be
the
included in the
process.
budget, right?
included in the budget?
It'll have to be included in the next year's budget. No idea what the cost is at this time.
Jim, you have another one?
I do. Here. I have the actual charter, so. Here. Oh. all right.
That's all I have.
The other side is the company not in a penal sum.
I'm sorry, Jim?
Mr. Bateson?
Yeah, quick question on this. So, Jim, just walk me through. So we hire a new Public Works Director in the next couple of weeks. The Board of Selectmen can say, we want a $10 million surety bond on their performance in the town. Part of their employment agreement would be the town would pay for that bond. In case anything went wrong, we would collect on that bond.
That's my understanding, yes.
Okay, and
Yeah.
so the Board of Selectmen could name any person in town, employee.
Yes,
So it could be the supervisor down at DPW.
it costs money.
It costs money, but I'm saying it's an employment decision. Of course, that's going to cost money. I'm not saying it's free, but, okay, all right. I see it.
The bond values, when they were doing it, were 500,000 per.
I get it. I'm just
giving you more information.
I'm processing what I just heard, and it's kind of upsetting.
Just, can I ask
okay,
a question?
yes, Mr.
So,
Charlton.
and you said that, I just want to make sure I understand, had those bonds been in place, they would have protected the town against third-party claims if those employees were named?
No, as this is distinguished from an insurance policy,
Okay.
which protects you against third-party claims.
Got it.
This protects you against mishaps and the ill effects of incompetence or misdeeds or negligence by,
A cleanup order from the deep, is that a third-party
I'm
claim?
sorry?
A cleanup order from deep, is that a third-party claim?
That is one of the, that's probably the primary basis for me making us making a claim under our director's policy.
So costs of testing, remediation, and all the things that we're dealing with now theoretically would have been covered had these bonds been in place? Is that what
Now,
you're saying?
now we're getting into the language of the coverage of those bonds, but
But-
I
okay,
think
but that's
that
the
in
idea.
principle, that's the idea.
Got it.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Jim, how much would it cost one of these bonds, do you know?
All depends on the.
How much it costs the
Depends on the
town?
amount of the bond.
How much of the bond, yeah?
I don't know, but I'm sure that the first selectwoman will, and, you know, we'll find out. Because, I mean, it's the intent to follow this and to get those numbers.
Jim, can you request that the first select woman get back to us in regards to those bonds, whether she puts them in place, how much they cost, and whether they're going to be part of the budget process this year?
That it's an item for the Board of Selectmen to address. So,
Excellent.
Yes.
Can I just, one more question, in relation to that, and the bonds are good, but as part of that process, some of the discussion that came up when these issues first surfaced were, you know, background checks, periodic background checks on officials, things like that. Has there been any discussion about that, in particular for new senior employees that are being hired?
I would have to defer to Mr. Hibson, but that should be part of the standard hiring processes. Background checks. I know that if we have contracts with vendors, that the background check is kind of a standard requirement, or should be.
Okay.
It will be.
We do criminal, we do credit, we do background checks. I basically, I don't know what they did, but we hired a company, Sterling. We have a contract with them every time we hire someone.
Yeah, and one of the things I've seen, at least in a corporate environment, is that they are done periodically. They're done upon hire, but for someone who has been an employee for a number of years, clearly people's circumstances can change, and oftentimes things will change between, you know, the time someone is hired and, you know, when they're still working for the town 20 years later. So just something to keep in mind. I think, you know, we had some issues arise with at least one of the individuals involved where, you know, no one was apparently aware that their house was in foreclosure, and they had those, you know, other types of issues. So I think, you know, for certain individuals in senior positions or who are responsible for who have signing authority on behalf of the town, those types of things. Something to consider, as well as the bonds.
Mr. DeWitt?
Mr. Mayor, where would we see the funding for these bonds in the budget?
Mr. Baldwin first mentioned this to me like about a week, 2 weeks ago maybe. He was looking at it and asked me about it. And I imagine it would be done in HR, somewhere in the HR fees and pros budget or something like that.
So it would be in HR's budget? So if I went back and, which is what I'm intending to do,
Well, I don't
frankly.
know what they would have done in the past.
Well, I'm saying, let's just say 2012 is the year they went away. I want to go back to 2011. Would I see Mary, I can't remember her name, the HR director's budget, say bonds? Oh, no, prior. I mean, would there be some line item that says bonds and there's a number?
I have
and then
no
next
idea.
year?
I have no idea what you'd find in 2012.
So you don't know even where we'd find it?
No. No, it's not something I ever looked at.
Can you
I mean, it's got to be in the budget. It says right here, shall be paid by the town, right? So,
Yeah, but I'm assuming it would be in HR.
So, Mr. Mayor,
HR.
can you try and,
yeah.
Like I said, the last one, the reason I know 2012 is that's when we hired Cindy, and I remember we did one on her.
Wherever your risk management is that HR?
Yes.
Risk management,
Yeah.
imagine.
Mrs. Leclerc?
I was wondering if you, because this is something I kind of kept asking about, because I kept thinking we had bonds and insurance, and that's why I didn't fully understand why we weren't covered. So is there a way to go back and look and see if, if it was thought that this fiduciary policy was going to replace them, who made that recommendation to us? Is it a current carrier, or is it, was it a human resource person? Was it a budget item? Is there a way to go back and look at that history? Did the Board of Selectmen approve it? Just so we know that it just didn't quietly just disappear, or?
That's why I want to find
disappear.
the
I know a
budget.
decision was made, but I think it was between risk management and First Selectman's office.
Okay.
Okay, any further questions? Thank you, Mr. Baldwin. Okay, item number 6, to hear, consider, and act upon any communications. I just have a couple quick things. First, thank you, everyone, for getting back to me on the committees of your choice. So for 2020, I'll just name the committee chairs and the committee members. For audit, the chair is Mary Leclerc. Members are Ed Bateson and Lori Charlton. For budget, chair is Chris DeWitt. Members are Jack Testani and John Matola. Fund balance, chair is Jim Walsh. Members are Mary Leclerc and Sheila Marmion. Correct? All right, so we have that set. Walter Fitzgerald, there's a tour, I think on the 21st and 28th. So I would just encourage us all to try and pick one. You went today? Yeah, there was one tonight, to try and pick a date and make that tour. Mrs.
They
Leclerc?
also added one Saturday at 9,
Which Saturday?
this Saturday.
This Saturday.
At 9 a.m.?
Okay, very good. Okay, so now we have three options. Okay, and the last thing I have, and I thank, again, everyone for getting back to me on this, Mr. Mayor, if you could cancel the March 3rd regular meeting, and we'll have a special meeting on March 10th. Okay, that's all I had. Mr. Mayor, you have anything?
Nothing received, no, sir.
Anyone have any? Mr. DeWitt?
Yeah, Jen Carpenter sent around the budget schedule. So Jen sent 2 things, our whole year schedule, and then there's another attachment there, which is the budget schedule for you guys, new people. That's the night-by-night breakdown of each budget that we're going to talk about. That's it, if there's any questions. But what Jen's doing right now is going to the department heads and make sure that there's no conflict there. Very, very rarely. Oh, Jerry, would you like that?
March 10th is last week.
No, it is good. It just won't be at the Board of Finance. Well, you and I will talk.
And March 10th's going to be our regular meeting. It's not a budget meeting.
It's, Right, so it's a special meeting, but yeah.
Yeah. So, that's it.
Because if you cancel a regular meeting, it becomes a special.
Yeah.
The things you learn when you're chair. Okay. All right. One last thing is that I believe the Board of Ed, the superintendent's budget will end up online tonight. Okay, and it'll be there for a month, and then the Board of Ed will vote. So if you want to take a look at the superintendent's budget, it'll be online. And then when the Board of Ed comes, after the Board of Ed votes, we'll get the books.
What time did,
Sorry?
They reviewed it tonight.
oh, we're reviewing it tonight? Okay.
Yeah, they're doing it tonight. It is something. It's only 10 o'clock. It's something to read till midnight.
Oh, we're doing it.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, you're good, so I'll take a motion to adjourn, our first voting item of the night. Mr. Mottola, seconded by Mr. Walsh. All those in favor?
Aye.
Good night.
Good job.